Hello, I'm Nina Melendez, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. In honor of the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we have a special show for you today. So many lives were changed after the towers fell, and we're going to hear from some members who were inspired to serve and made career pivots. But first, let's talk about those who are serving that day and what the impact has been on their health 20 years later. Joining me now is Richard Palmer, a retired warden who helped the NYPD after the first plane hit. He works now at the Feel Good Foundation, advocating for the sick and dying first responders. Also with us is Dr. Sean Clouston, an epidemiologist in the Department of Family, Population, and Preventative Medicine at Stony Brook University. Dr. Clouston conducts many of the research studies regarding the health of first responders. Thank you both for being here on the show today.
Thank you, Nina, for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to start with you, Richard. 20 years, time has gone by so quickly, and yet here we are. As we have approached this date, just curious what some of your emotions and observations have been as someone who was there on the ground when it happened.
Well, it's a 20-year remembrance, but for response survivors, we live this every day. So I know it's getting a lot of media coverage because it's the 20th year, but this is something that myself, my team, the correction department, the fire department, the police department, and whoever responded down there and whoever lived down there, went to school down there, this is something that they live every day and we live every day.
That's a great point. And, actually recently the Victim Compensation Fund released their special report on this. And I want to talk about what they said here, that more people now are believed to have died of 9/11 related illnesses than were lost on September 11th. Sean, this question is for you. You helped monitor the role of long duration exposures at the World Trade Center. Mm-hmm. Were you surprised by this statement?
No, not really. In some ways, it's a sad statement. It's been only 20 years, right? And most responders are actually still in the prime of their life, and so it's actually a very sad statement. I think it may be in some ways an undercount, although it's hard to know. But it certainly is it's kind of what eventually was to be expected. There was an awful lot of exposures down there. And those exposures changed these people's lives, and now that those exposures might be catching up with them.
A lot of these long-term illnesses actually take years to manifest, which can be difficult to prove cause and effect, which can then later be difficult to prove eligibility for payouts. I'm curious how your research is actually helping rectify this.
Well, so yeah, we look at a bunch of sort of long latency issues, really. So these are diseases that take a while to emerge. I mostly focus on cognitive impairment and physical impairments that emerge later in life. And we're seeing them very early, actually. We do know that they take decades to emerge, and so now is about the right time if they're exposure related to start emerging, and that's kind of what we see. We imagine that a lot of diseases emerge right away, right? Like you do the one thing and then the outcome happens, but that's basically not how the body works. There's a lot of resilience in the body, and a lot of your body is able to fight off different pathogens and different types of diseases for a while, different exposures, and but not forever. And so a lot of aging-related conditions and a lot of conditions like cancer emerge after a while. They emerge decades after their exposure may have even ended. And so now is about the right time for many of these conditions.
Yeah, the VCF report also said that 48% of claimants have cancer as one of their eligible conditions, which is just horrifying. I want to pause the conversation and say hi to our members who are joining us. So many are sending their respects, comments like always, remember and never forget. So let's say hello to some of the folks who are joining. Oscar Cedino from San Francisco, Stephen and Jacqueline from New York City. Thanks for joining. And if you have questions for Richard Palmer or for Sean Clouston, let us know and we'll get those answered for you. Richard, the VCF has issued almost about $9 billion in awards from your perspective, has this been enough?
Well, I just want to piggyback one thing about what the doctor was saying as far as the latency period and all that. And I'm not a doctor, but I've been dealing with this for the last 20 years, walking the halls of Congress and seeing, and there was a lot of denial in the beginning that we didn't have enough evidence to prove that we got sick from working down there. And I was 39 in 2001 and ended up having a quadruple bypass at 43 with no family history. I wasn't obese. I never smoked. And there's still a lot of things I think that need to be added to the healthcare bill, like neuropathy and autoimmune. And this is stuff that they've been studying, and the doctor could probably relate more about it. But the latency period with the cancers and stuff, there's no doubt. But there was too many young guys that were having heart issues, having autoimmune system problems that were too young, that aren't supposed to happen till later in life. And I just think that the government, like we had a battle for everything else, is worrying about if they were to add these conditions, what it would cost them to fund it, and that there wouldn't be enough money in the program.
I think it's just insane to think that being in ground zero for any prolonged amount of time wouldn't have an impact on people's health. I mean, if you just look at the toxins and the soot and all of that. Richard, actually, I do have a question for you. You know, your story of how you became an advocate is very interesting. Can you tell our viewers about that, about how it is that you joined the Feel Good Foundation?
I met John Feel, who's the Feel Good Foundation is named under, on a bus trip to DC. And the doctor knows that back in the day, when the World Trade Center program first got up and running, it was on a yearly budget. So every year at the end of the year, when the omnibus would go through, they would put some funding into the World Trade Center Health Program to continue it for the next year. And what was happening is the medical doctors, the nurses that were all working down there, there was no guarantee they were going to have a job next year. So the turnover was high. And a lot of the responders and survivors and stuff, when you go to your doctor, you'd like to keep your doctor and have a relationship with your doctor to be able to feel comfortable talking to them. And every time you went to the set to go down for your medical, there was a different doctor or nurse that you were seeing. So that was one of the biggest things that we felt, that going back down every year, it just couldn't be done, and asking every year for the federal government to back us. So that's how we started taking these bus trips down to DC, and I met John Feel and a few other responders along with some of the attorneys. And John had the Feel Good Foundation, and we just started a team, and we just started walking the halls of Congress and telling them that we can't have this for every year. So in 2010, they gave us a 5-year bill for the Victims Compensation Fund for healthcare, because they felt there wasn't enough medical evidence to extend it more than 5 years. And as far as the Victims Compensation Fund, they were worrying about bogus cases and fraud and everything else. So the first bill we got passed in 2010 was for 5 years, and healthcare was for 5 years. But then we went back in 2015 advocating again, because the bill was going to run out. And we were able to convince them, based on the medical documentation and studies we had now, that they were able to give us a 75-year bill for the healthcare. And they only, once again, gave us a 5-year bill for the Victims Compensation Fund.
I mean, 5 years it's like no time whatsoever. And actually, Dr. Clouston, I want to bring up actually some research that you've done that has come out recently about how the long-term cognitive effects and how there's proof that there's dementia is now widespread among 9/11 first responders. Can you tell me a little bit about that research and your findings?
Sure. So we're not used to talking about dementia in populations this young. These people are on average in their 50s right now. Some are older, but not that many. And so when you think about these very active people who were, engaged in the response effort, they were strong, they were employed, they were down there, they were very well educated, and they're very engaged. And so they rushed down to help out, and And now here we are 20 years later, they're in their 50s, and there are many that seem to be experiencing something that looks a lot like Alzheimer's disease or related dementia, and are starting to have problems, you know. And so what we've done is a couple of different things. We've looked at symptoms that are consistent with sort of mild disease, which is what we were kind of expecting to see a little bit. And we found some people actually had more severe cognitive impairments that look like dementia. So then we've really dug into it, and we've looked at people who originally we said were cognitively normal. Well, what happened to them, right? So one argument might be that people who look like they have poor memories basically always had that their entire life. So we did a longitudinal study to sort of rule that out and to see whether or not it is true that, you know, the more exposed people were at more risk. And what we found was that the people who were cognitively unimpaired, when we started looking at them, that if we followed them up for a couple of years, the people were more exposed, the people who had more severe re-experiencing stress consistent with what's usually called PTSD, those were the most at risk for this cognitive impairment. And since then, we've done imaging studies, we've done biomarker studies, and they all basically point to the same thing. These individuals are experiencing something that looks like a neurodegenerative disease at higher rates than they should.
So it's the folks who are on ground zero the longest are more likely to have symptoms of dementia. Wow, yeah. That's fascinating. And I want to actually bring up another idea that's happened, or not idea, fact. The fact of COVID, and to you, Richard, as you have gone to Capitol Hill and as you go to Albany and you advocate for the health of first responders, how will COVID come into the conversation?
Well, COVID was another battle. You know, I live in New York, so you know we were advocating on behalf of first responders who were, you know, when they first came out with the COVID vaccine, that you had to be 65 and over and have illnesses. And a lot of responders, like the doctor said, like myself, I'm 59 years old and I have many certified illnesses, but I wasn't qualified to get the vaccine. And we advocated on behalf of the 9/11 responders. We did interviews, and you know, we begged the governor to allow us to get the vaccine, and it was a battle, and we had to wait a couple months to be able to get the vaccine. And guys were worrying. We get calls every day that guys are afraid to leave their house to go for treatment for their chemo, and they're afraid they're going to get the COVID and die. And it's just, once again, that we had to fight and continue to fight. Every time an issue comes up where 9/11 responders are needed for the health care, they have to fight for it. So it's just bureaucratic crap, and it really pisses off a lot of people, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I imagine, of course. And Dr. Clouston, what is one of the major illnesses associated with being on ground zero? Is it respiratory illnesses, or is it more so cancer? What is?
So originally there were a lot of respiratory illnesses because they came up fast and hard, and then a lot of mental health conditions. So there's a lot of like PTSD, which, you know, is the carrying around the memory and being stressed out by it, in essence. So those are the most common conditions, or aerodigestive, so airways or in stomach. Many responders swallowed dust and it's still there. And mental health conditions. And so we're advocating to look more at some of these other types of conditions. Cancer has come up as people have gotten older. It's more common as people get older, but also you expect it as people get older, and similarly with the cognitive stuff.
Nina, that, as a doctor has said, the PTSD is a big thing with first responders and even survivors, but the audience should know that they're medically treated, but they're compensationally, they don't get paid for having PTSD.
Can you explain that to me?
Well, meaning once you go into the World Trade Program, you get certified in certain medical conditions based on asthma, cancer, rhinitis, sleep apnea, and so on. PTSD is recognized, and it's caused from working down there. But when it comes to being paid out through the government, through the Victims Compensation Fund, it's not a payable certification.
And is that, are you advocating for that? I imagine you are, that when you go down there that you advocate. That's
Well,
this is part of what
I don't think the government would ever allow that to happen, because even a doctor will let you know that there's probably, I would say, I'm not a doctor, but I would say 80 to 90% of first responders are suffering from some type of anxiety or PTSD.
Yeah. I before I let you go, unfortunately, we have to wrap this up. I want to hear, what do both of you think is missing from the conversation that we have about 9/11, and what is really important for our audience to understand and to know from each of your respective perspectives?
I'll take the first part there and let Rich follow up. For me, I think it's that 9/11 didn't really end. We often talk about it as though it's this unique event. It happened on September 11th, and I think that ignores that it didn't happen. It started to happen on September 11th. The response efforts were months long, right? They went into 2002. The fires kept burning for that long. And then since then, there's been all of this fallout that we're still trying to understand now. And so it didn't really just end then, but it's still going on. And we're still understanding more and more about it. And I think that's what I would say. Rich?
And I would just say that, like the doc said, being the 20-year anniversary, the amount of tension, even from foreign media that we've been having to deal with, this is stuff that survivors, volunteers, and responders live every day. Every day is 9/11 in our minds, as far as it's something we don't forget. We move on in life and we deal with it, and we deal with our illnesses because of the healthcare program. We're able to survive because of the medications and the funding that was granted to us. But this is something that it just doesn't come up on 9/11, and they're going to read the names for the families, which is great, and it needs to continue to do that. But this is something that the 9/11 community deals with every day is 9/11 or 9/12. That it's the longest day ever, and it's something that we will live for the rest of our lives, and not just when it comes around on the anniversary date.
Well, we've had so many comments from the stream. Marie from Long Island, Lillian from Chicago, Catherine from New Jersey. And on behalf of them and our audience and us here at LinkedIn News, I just want to thank the both of you. Rich, I want to thank you for your advocacy and for your service and for going down there on that day and continuing to deal with this all these years. And Dr. Clouston, thank you so much for the research, the important research that you do in helping expose all of this. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Nina.
And as we continue to honor the events and those who served on September 11th, my colleagues put together a video talking about people who were inspired, veterans and survivors who were inspired to change their careers after the events happened. Take a listen.
It would be very easy to be bitter about having changed my life in such a drastic way in response to 9/11.
When 9/11, happened, it definitely kept me in my career path and working in something that I felt was making a difference.
I've been on Wall Street for 30 plus years. What have I got to show for it? Nothing. My name is Ari Schönbrunn, and I'm 64 years old. I guess it was like the whole Wall Street thing was kind of an accident for me. I had been doing other things after college, trying to find myself. I had then met the president of Cantor Fitzgerald, and he said to me, "I need a guy like you. Do you want to come work?" And I went like, "Of course." And that's how I wound up in Cantor Fitzgerald in 1993. We occupied the top 5 floors of Tower 1.
My name's Byron Hartman. I'm 41 years old. I'm in Ankara, Turkey, with the U.S. Embassy in Ankara. I started at New York University, Tisch School of the Arts in 1997. I majored in theater with a focus in directing and design. I actually finished my coursework in summer of 2000 and had been working as a designer, master electrician, grip for a little bit of film and TV work.
My name is Veronica Medeiros. I'm 43 and I live in Northern Virginia. When I was getting ready to graduate, I decided to look into the Air Force. My first choice was actually linguist, but I wasn't able to get into that career path. And my second one was secure communications, which just sounded cool to me as a 18-year-old. My first duty position was the Pentagon.
My name is Aaron Leroy. I'm 38 years old and currently stationed at Fort Sam Houston here in San Antonio, Texas. I wanted to be that guy with a tie and a hard hat, and I didn't know what that meant. Does that mean working at a job construction site, or does that mean working for NASA? I just knew that somehow that equated to engineering of some sort. My ultimate goal, fundamentally, was to be the first Leroy on my side of the family to have a college degree. To me, I had two opportunities with a scholarship to OU and the fact that I had talked all the way at length to where I was prepared to join the Air Force. And I really just wanted to take a moment to reflect and kind of slow down everything.
I start heading into work and I'm approaching the Atlantic Avenue stop on the DQ, and this guy comes running past me yelling that a plane had just hit the Trade Center.
I was standing basically about 100 feet. So on the outside, I wasn't even looking in that direction when everything happened. Just when I heard the noise, looked up, and then I just saw, all the smoke coming up. A lot of people just sprung into action during that time to try and help each other out.
From that corner down there, coming all the way here, and all the way down to that corner down there, those are all Cantor Fitzgerald victims. 658. So the morning of September 11th was like any other morning for me. It was 20 to 7 in the morning. I had my briefcase over my shoulder, I had my cup of coffee in my hand. I started to walk out the door. I yelled up to my wife, "Bye, hun, love you, see ya." I yelled up to my kids, "Bye, kids, have a great day in school." And I started to walk out the door. My wife yells down to me, she said, "Did you do Baruch's book order?" My son's scholastic book order was due. And my wife said that I was supposed to do it with him because she didn't have the time. She was busy. That cost me 20 minutes. And that 20 minutes turned into 40 for me to get to the Trade Center. I got to the Trade Center at 20 to 9. My office is on the 101st floor. Now, you couldn't take an elevator from the lobby all the way to 101. You had to take an express to 78. And then you changed on the Sky Lobby to take elevators to get to the higher floors. When I got out on 78, and I started to walk, and I must have been about 8 feet from that bank of elevators, when, as best as I can describe, there was an explosion. The entire building shook. The lights went out, the place filled with smoke, and I was literally thrown off my feet. And I was standing right in front of the building, right in front of the hill, okay? And I looked up, and it was like, how did Building 2 get on fire? Because I had no idea.
We had to come back in to work the very next day because there was very few of us that had access to the building. They only let people that were mission essential. When 9/11, happened, it definitely kept me in my career path and working in something that I felt was making a difference, contributing my little grain of sand to history. I think I would do it all over again.
I recall September 15th that I heard the President Bush's address to the nation on the radio. The family was driving together to see my grandmother. He said something to the effect of, it would not be on any battlefield or named beachhead.
This is a conflict without battlefields or beachheads. We are planning a broad and sustained campaign to secure our country and eradicate the evil of terrorism. And we are determined to see this conflict through.
I remember being in the back seat and seeing my mom, she may or may not admit to this, but seeing her wipe her face. I contacted the recruiter, I believe, that following Tuesday. So at that point, we were 7 days after 9/11. And I was at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas in boot camp the last week of October.
Basically, all I could do was sit around the house and watch the news. There was just this constant litany of, why did this happen? What does it mean? And so we had this sort of family tradition of service. My father became a surgeon through service in the U.S. Army. My grandfather had also served. My great-grandfather had also served. And so I had this crazy idea that, I could make a difference and that the Army was the place to do it. That was what led me to make the decision in January of 2002 to enlist.
A couple of weeks later, right, I get a call from a friend of mine who has a son who goes to one of the local schools. And she said to me, we're having our annual dinner and the theme is going to be 9/11. She goes, we're going to have a panel of 3 people. It's going to be Q&A with the audience. And I go oh, Q&A in the audience, I can do that. So that was the first time that I actually spoke in public. And 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. This organization called Echo, we would like you to come speak. At that point in time, I realized that I had a gift. I had a gift. And what I needed to do was give people hope.
Life is going to throw a lot of dirt on you. You know what life's all about? It's about the decisions that we make. It's not what happens, it's how we react to what happens.
It wasn't really a career. I did it in my spare time. But about 4.5 years ago, I finally realized, you know what? I've been on Wall Street for 30 plus years. What have I got to show for it? Nothing. Nothing. And I said, I'm done. Wall Street's over. I'm going to do this full time. This is my career. And we're here today.
Because of 9/11, I didn't know it, but I was indeed suffering, from PTSD. I basically self-soothed with food. I got to be over 300 pounds at one point. So it's been a learning experience for me over the years, what works, what doesn't work. I'm looking at doing a change career and actually going into medicine. So actually going into a nursing program pretty soon. That's basically become my sacred calling, as a result of working at the Pentagon. I'm just as scared as I was when I walked into a burning building 20 years ago. But, sometimes you just got to take the bull by the horns.
I'm not the only person that has had an experience like this. There's something that people would do in New York that has always stayed with me. In the months after September 11th, you'd come up out of the subway and you would still have that reflexive point. You'd look around to try and figure out where the towers were, because if you could find the towers, then you could orient yourself to where you were. And so for months after September 11th, you'd see people come out of the subway and they'd look up and they'd look around, and you could tell that they were trying to get their bearings. And I think that's what a lot of us were going through across the country. We were trying to get our bearings in our lives, that we were trying to get our bearings in our careers. And in many cases, it took a change. It took making a significant change to find that thing that gave you purpose again.
Thanks everyone for watching. I'm Nina Melendez. We'll see you Monday.